him a lot, 'cause we got him on the spot. Welcome back. Welcome back. Welcome back. Welcome back. Welcome back. Welcome back.
Hello listeners, this is Paula Schaffner and welcome back to On the Spot. This time I'll be looking at the 17th episode of Welcome Back, Kotter, Follow the Leader Part 2. And as I mentioned before, this was when they shifted over from Tuesdays to Thursdays, so it first aired on January 22nd, 1976 at 8 p.m. and it was followed by Barney Miller. The IMDb summary is again pretty long. Mr. Kotter seeks to reconcile with Julie. Freddie's leadership of the Sweathogs evokes the adage of absolute power corrupting absolutely, and Barbarino weighs humility versus being a high school dropout and door-to-door tidy-didy cleanser salesman. So again, somewhat overwritten. Bob Lehendro directed as usual, and as with part 1, this was written by the husband and wife team of Jewel Jaffe Rano and Jerry Rano. And I'll mention right now that it is the 10th Vernaging episode. We begin with scenes from part 1. There's Julie telling Gabe that this is ridiculous through the part about there always being a little sweat hog between them as Arnold watches from the window. Then we see Kotter counting the votes during the election and Epstein's deciding vote. A quick bit of Vinnie saying he's dropping out of school. Julie's reaction hearing that Vinnie will be staying with her and Gabe. And Julie's goodbye, Mr. Kotter. Then we get Kaplan's voiceover saying, "We now continue with part 2 of our story." Then we go into the opening theme. We start with a freeze frame of Gabe sleeping on the sofa bed with a person on his left covered up by blankets. There's a tap on the window and we can see a silhouette of what we will find out is Juan, although you can kind of tell from the hair, and that's behind the blinds on the stage right window. There's applause as Gabe wakes up. He sleepily pats the person next to him and tells Julie to see who's knocking on the window because Gabe is going back to sleep. Vinnie bolts upright, shirtless. There's squeals, cheers, applause, and a little laughter. Gabe taps Vinnie's shoulder and says, "Go ahead, honey." Vinnie looks at Kotter in surprise and confusion. Kotter feels Vinnie's muscles and says, "Those exercises are really working." Then he sits up in surprise and indignation that it's not Julie. This whole situation is about how Julie feels that Gabe is spending too much time and attention on his students. I can't even imagine how she would react to find her husband in bed with one of them. It is done very innocently. I don't think it's even done in the way that a few years later we would get the surprise of Jack Tripper waking up with Mr. Roper. This is not something that you would probably see on a mostly wholesome sitcom aimed at kids these days. There are connotations. Vinnie says that he knows that he's not Julie, but he answers the window. He's wearing brown pajama bottoms and we can see a hint of the back of his underwear. There are louder squeals. So although I don't think we are meant to read anything into Gabe sharing the bed with Vinnie, they are definitely playing to the fangirls in the studio audience and probably at home, presenting Travolta as a teen heartthrob. Vinnie rolls up the blinds and reveals Juan looking surprised. Vinnie is annoyed that Epstein is here. Gabe gets out of bed on the other side wearing the gray t-shirt and pajama bottoms we saw before. He says it's 7:30 in the morning. And we'll find out in a while that school begins at 9, so this seems a bit late to get up, although I guess he could walk to school, or it's a short bus ride. Vinnie puts on his matching pajama top as Kotter opens the window. Now, I don't know whose pajamas these are. I'm guessing that they were Gabe's, but we never saw him in them. And it's clear that it's cold outside again, as it was in the previous episode. And of course, these were airing in January. Epstein grins as he says that he came by for breakfast. This place was highly recommended. Kotter asks by who, rather than by whom. Arnold pops into view, laughing and waving. He wiggles his eyebrows during the applause. Kotter says he told Arnold not to come here for breakfast anymore. Vinnie says he'll give them breakfast, so he grabs a cereal box and a glass. Then he goes over the window and hands the box to Arnold. Arnold is disappointed that it's dry cereal. Where's the milk? Vinnie throws a glass full of milk at both of them. There's cheers and applause. So we definitely get some slapstick in this episode, as we did in the previous one. Kotter scolds Barbarino. One says to Arnold, "Hey, you said we have reservations." And Arnold says, "Well, you know what happens when a place gets popular." In a way, it's just as well Julie isn't here because she would be even more annoyed that instead of just one sweat hug coming for breakfast, there are two, not to mention, of course, that somebody would be in her bed. Kotter tells the two of them to come in and dry off. Then he scolds Barbarino again. As Gabe puts on his blue robe, Arnold asks what Vinnie is doing here. Now, neither of them says anything about the fact that Mr. Kotter and Vinnie were clearly sleeping in the same bed. They just find it odd that Vinnie is there in the apartment before they are. As one enters, Kotter says Vinnie is giving him a nervous breakdown. If Vinnie's father doesn't take him back, they're both going to wind up in the funny farm. Then Kotter does one of his silly faces with silly sounds. Arnold Arnold asks where Mrs. Kotter is and lifts a pillow as if she'd be under it. He puts his hand to his ear and says he doesn't hear the crackle of farm-fresh country eggs. So apparently that's what she's been serving him in Brooklyn. Vinnie tells him, cool it, turkey, which is one of the most 70s put-downs I can imagine. He says that Mrs. Kotter split. Arnold puts an arm around Mr. Kotter sympathetically and says he's so sorry for him. But Juan grins and says, she took a powder, huh? Because again, Juan is not the person you want around when you have marital difficulties. Kotter says she did, right after she told him that he spends too much time with his students. Juan thinks this is ridiculous, and Arnold says they haven't seen him since they walked him home from school yesterday. They are pretty much oblivious to overstepping bounds. Vinnie says he isn't going to stay in the same room with his ex-friends, Benedict and Arnold. He goes in the bathroom. This is another historical joke, one that even little kids would get. Benedict Arnold was referred to multiple times on The Brady Bunch, by the way, including in one episode title. And his name is still synonymous with treachery. Gabe wonders why he got in the middle of this. There are some teachers who only see their students in school. Arnold and Juan are now eating cereal out of the box. So although they wanted farm fresh eggs, they're going to settle for this. And we know that Juan at least pretty much has a terrible home life, and it's hard for him to even get fed. We don't know as much about Arnold's home life yet. Gabe says Julie was right, and he's going to call her right now and tell her that. He wants privacy, so he tells Arnold and Juan to go feed their faces, even though the kitchen is only a few feet away. And of course they can hear this. Juan wants to make waffles, but he doesn't know how. Arnold says it's kind of like making pancakes, only you got to put little dents in them. Juan shrugs and picks up a meat tenderizer because it's shaped to make little dents. Gabe calls a hotel, which we'll find out is the only hotel in the neighborhood, and I picture it being really run down. He assumes she's there, and I guess that makes sense because she wouldn't want to spend money on a cab or a pricier hotel. This is someplace she could walk to. He asks the person on the phone to give him Julie Cotter's room. When they say that there's no Julie Cotter, he suggests Julie Hansen and starts to explain that that's her maiden name, and they had a little spat, but the desk clerk apparently says, who cares? And this is another episode where we get one-sided phone conversations where we're just hearing Gabe's side. I think this is the first mention of Julie's maiden name. If not, it's pretty early, and we definitely will hear it again. Arnold says his mother's maiden name is Dingfelder. Robert Hedges, I have to give kudos to because he plays it totally straight in this next part. Doesn't break character no matter how funny Ron Palillo is. He nods and hands Arnold a glass of orange juice. Arnold says his middle name is Dingfelder. Juan gets his own glass of orange juice and takes a sip. Arnold says he never uses his middle name. How would that sound? Hello, how are ya? I'm Arnold Dingfelder Horshack. Juan takes another sip and Arnold does his laugh. Gabe yells to cool it, so Juan sticks an egg in Arnold's mouth, I assume hard-boiled. And the two of them just play off of each other really well in this little bit. Gabe talks sweetly to Julie and calls her honey, but then he hears that she spoke to his cousin Bernie the lawyer, and that was one of the scenes that we got a little preview of last time. I wonder if this is the son of one of his at least two Uncle Bernies. He asks why she didn't speak to her own cousin Bernie the lawyer. She tells him there are no Bernies in Nebraska, implying that there are no Jews in Nebraska. Gabe demands to know why Bernie would represent her and go against his own flesh and blood. She gave Bernie $75. Gabe tells her that that was a stupid thing to do, and she's really acting like a Yetz from Nebraska, which was the insult on the previous episode. She understandably hangs up, so he hangs up too. Arnold and Juan come over with their orange juice glasses. Arnold feels bad for Mr. Kotter, but he wants him to always remember a woman is a sometime thing, which is a reference to a song from the musical Porgy and Bess, but the rest of these recited lyrics are ones that Juan and Arnold come up with. Juan continues, she'll take your heart and give it a fling. Arnold says, but when true love runs off its course, Juan concludes, then she'll sue you for divorce. Underneath the audience reaction, you could hear Arnold say, and yet a woman. Gabe opens the window and tells them to get out of here. They leave quickly, Kotter making them return the glasses. Vinnie emerges from the bathroom in a yellow turtleneck and black slacks as Kotter shuts the window. He must have brought some clothes. He asks if those punks finally left, and again the thing of a punk is a worthless person. Kotter orders him to either go to school or get a job. Vinnie says Kotter sounds just like Vinnie's father when he kicked Vinnie out. Vinnie is going to prove that you don't need brains to get a job, and again the thing of Vinnie as the least intelligent Sweathog. He leaves with his leather jacket slung over his shoulder. Kotter again calls the hotel. As his call is transferred, he says he'll show her who's boss. You've got to be firm with women. But as soon as she's on the line, he calls her baby and honey and speaks sweetly. He gets her to agree to come over to talk about this without lawyers after school at 3:30, and we already know that school gets out at 3. There's applause as he hangs up and makes an I hope this works gesture with both his hands. The first scene at the school is in the hallway. I won't list all the extras because I think it's pretty much the same as the previous episode. The redheaded boy is talking to one of the petite brunette white girls. He might be flirting since he's leaning on the wall, and we can see he's much taller than her. Ricky and Joyce are sitting on the bench looking at a textbook, and Ricky is the boy who wears a cap, and we'll find out in this episode that that is his name, and Joyce is the usual black female extra. And the most interesting pairing to me is Verna Jean and the not Gutenberg boy are practicing dance steps. And it's not touch dancing, but combined with what we'll see later, it just made me go, The bell rings and a whistle blasts, so they and the others file into class. Their smiles fade as Freddie orders everyone to move and step lively. Freddie is wearing an army green cap and jacket. Kotter comes in after them with his briefcase, so it's probably homeroom rather than the afternoon class. Then before most of them can sit, Freddie tells them to hold it, so they all freeze. Then he says it's all right, and they can go to their seats. He salutes Kotter. He says, all present accounted for, sir, except for Epstein and Horshack. They AWOL. Absent without leave. Kotter asks what Washington does when school's over. Attack Staten Island. Freddie has become very militaristic as the new leader of the Sweathogs. Juan enters with Arnold behind him and his hands on Juan's shoulders. And so we get a lot of Juan and Arnold as kind of a comedy team or duo in this episode. Freddie blows his whistle, so Juan and Arnold put their hands against the blackboard and spread them like they think they're going to be arrested. There's applause. Kotter says that's a false alarm. It's just their fearless leader. Kotter calls Freddie general and tells him to sit down. Juan and Arnold sit, but Freddie doesn't. He tells Arnold to straighten up. Then he calls to Ricky by name. Ricky is over by the window, so he tells him to sit down. He tells Juan he wants his hair cut by morning, and of course Juan has a very full, what would later be called a Jufro. Juan asks what's with Freddie. Freddie smiles and says he's just being the leader. Juan says he's wishing he never voted for Freddie, and of course in the previous episode he had the deciding vote. Arnold says Vinnie didn't always act like the leader. Sometimes he acted like a real person, so implying that you can't be both a leader and a person. The class agrees. Kotter wants to get to work, but Freddie blows his whistle, making the not Gutenberg boy, who I will again mostly refer to as NG, almost fall out of his seat, and Joyce put her finger to her ear like he heard it, and they're on either side of him. So it was really loud for them. Freddie tells Mr. Kotter, so still using that cool pronunciation, even in this new personality, that they need a recreation period. Kotter gestures silently several times that Freddie needs to step closer, and then when Freddie comes over, Kotter yells that class didn't start yet, so of course they can't have a recreation period. But Freddie suggests they start with a break before they get all tired. He laughs. He blows his whistle and calls for a 3-minute break. He puts on a square dancing record to everyone's disbelief, and he demonstrates a bit of square dancing, so apparently there is a record player in the classroom. Kotter turns off the record player. He says he's taking this record and mailing it back to Hee Haw. And this was a very famous variety show which ran on CBS starting in 1969, but it was part of the Rural Purge in 1971 where they got rid of all of their country rural shows, sitcoms and variety shows. But it was such a hit in syndication that it kept going until 1993, and I definitely watched it as a child. Kotter again calls Freddie general and tells him to sit, so Freddie sits. Kotter says Freddie is the leader of the Sweathogs, but Kotter is the commander-in-chief. What he says goes, and he'd like to say a few things. His name is Mr. Kotter, and he is their teacher from 9 to 3, so that is what the school day is, only 6 hours, and he's not their teacher at any other time, which means coming to his house is a definite no-no. And of course, in the earliest episodes, he did object to them coming over, but eventually he tolerated it, and things got really out of hand. He says, you people have caused friction between him and his wife, and he will not let that happen anymore. From now on, no jokes and no impressions in this classroom. And he wants them to turn their books to chapter 47, and I wondered if the chapters are really short in this book, and I assume it's that old textbook that we found out about on Mr. Kotter Teacher. He wants a full outline by tomorrow morning, so whether or not it's a short chapter, it still sounds like a lot of work for them. And we at least know now that this day isn't Friday, but as I said before, the timeline in this two-parter is really fuzzy. From now on, he'll teach and they'll learn. Simple. Arnold sees no reason for him to take it out on them. They are impressionable children, just because his personal life is crumbling around his ears. So he has a point, and it's, of course, with the odd Arnold phrasing. There's applause and a snip of the theme song as Kotter sits at his desk and looks uncomfortable. In the next scene, Gabe is in the same outfit and quickly cleaning up the apartment. He throws a bunch of kitchen stuff on the closet floor and then has trouble closing the door. He answers the front door to Julie, who's got her tan coat draped over her shoulders. He says it's a pleasant surprise she's a little early. Now, we know that school ends at 3, 3 and she was coming over at 3:30. Maybe take 5 minutes to get home, maybe less. He takes her purse and coat and he almost puts them in the closet, and then he thinks better of it, so he hangs them on the coat rack. The Cotters sit on the couch, but before she can say much, he has to ask if there's another man. So now when we had the episode The Longest Weekend, he was worried that she might cheat on him or at least flirt with a ski instructor, and some of the Sweathogs were encouraging that insecurity, and now that she's left him, he wonders, is she in love with somebody else? She says there are 4. He looks understandably surprised and then says now he knows how she spends her afternoons. And of course this is ironic for many reasons, including that she is very bored at home and has nothing to do. And if she were cheating on him with 4 men, that would certainly keep her busy and perhaps more contented. She stands and says there are 4 boys. He's with them all day, and then when he comes home at night, he thinks of new ways to entertain them. He stands and says what's wrong with her is she's jealous. She's not implying that he's fooling around with the Sweathogs, but again, it's just odd that she doesn't know that he innocently spent the night in bed with Vinnie, who was half dressed. And we heard in a previous episode that Vinnie sleeps in the nude. At least he had pajama bottoms on. Gabe says Julie is so busy envying his life, she hasn't had time to go out and find a life of her own. She says she can't do anything. She's an anthropology major. So we get a little bit more about her backstory. If you wondered why is this bright, modern, feminist woman just hanging around the house waiting for her husband to come home and tell her jokes, the answer is sort of that she has an education that makes her unemployable. And then Gabe snaps that she should dig up the living room, which is more like if she had said she had an archaeology major. He doesn't know what to do. He's so frustrated. If she doesn't stop feeling sorry for herself, he's going to put his fist through the end table. She calls his bluff. He hits the table and then excuses himself to the bathroom so that he can yell from the pain. This is a little bit like when Gabe said he was going to break down the bathroom door. He's not very good at being the tough guy. He returns and someone knocks on the front door. He opens the door to Vinnie, who's in his tidy-didy uniform with a striped hat that has a button that says tidy-didy, and the jacket matches that. Now, that jacket looks like what he wore on the reunion episode, but it is possible that this is part of the uniform that he got as a tidy-didy salesman. There's squeals, laughter, and applause, although I don't think it's as striking as when he dressed as a priest in the previous episode. He introduces himself as Vinnie Barbarino, your tidy-didy man. He reminds Kotter that he told Vinnie to get a job. Julie is now on the couch, and Vinnie sees that the woman at the house is home. He comes in and sets down his case with the tidy-didy logo on it. He takes off his cap and says he's here to show them how tidy-didy cleaner can change their life. Julie doesn't believe this. Vinnie takes out a bottle of tidy-didy, but Gabe tells him to go and tidy his didy somewhere else. If I didn't know that tidy-didy was a cleaner, I would have thought it had something to do with diapers. This is sort of bathroom humor. Vinnie still tries to do a spiel, and he says, wherever dirt congregates, tidy-didy acts like thousands of teeny-weeny dirt suckers. Julie stands and says this is where she came in. Gabe is again paying more attention to a Sweathog. Gabe stops her from leaving, and he insists that they both sit. They reluctantly do. He tells her she's right that he's changed. He's a teacher, a good teacher. Right now, he's going to teach. He asks Vinnie if this is what he's going to do with the rest of his life. Tidy-didies? He was voted out as leader, not voted out of school. He advises Vinnie to go back to school. He walks over to Julie and says nobody voted her out of this house. He sits next to her and says, okay, they have problems, but the only way to solve them is to solve them together. He knows that she's living his life, and she has to have her own life, but he can't make that happen for her. She has to do that for herself. Julie and Vinnie look at each other, and then they both get up. Gabe doesn't want them both to leave. They both say they'll think about it, and then they leave. Gabe tells the now empty apartment that he thought that that was a really great speech. There's applause as we fade to the next scene. Now in the hallway, NG and Verna Jean are sitting on a bench together, and she has an open textbook in her lap, and she's holding a pencil. He smiles at her, and she playfully hits his hand. So I'm suddenly shipping them in this episode. I don't know if it goes anywhere. The Dorothy Hamill-haired girl is reading a textbook by herself. The fluffy-haired boy is on a bench by the lockers, and the girl with longer brown hair is at her locker. Kotter is in the foreground. Woodman runs in, chased by Freddie, who's blowing his whistle and still wearing the army green hat and jacket. Joyce crosses in front of them. Freddie suggests starting school after lunch to make the day shorter. Woodman tells Kotter to call off his Sweathog. Kotter tells Washington to take his whistle and blow. The audience ohs, and a girl audibly says, I heard that. Like, take it and blow it out your orifice? is how the audience is interpreting that, and I think that's how it was meant. Freddie heads to the classroom, blowing his whistle, so some of the extras go in. But Vernagine and NG keep talking and studying, and maybe flirting. As Juan and Arnold show up and go into the classroom, Woodman tells Kotter to never repeat what he's about to say to him. And then, in a distraught voice, he says he misses Barbarino, and he exits. So again, Woodman is not in this episode very much, but he is very Woodman. The bell rings, so NG and Vernagine finally get up. We can see Vernagine touching NG's arm as Kotter urges the last students into the room. Kotter wants to talk about the two-party system. He asks Epstein about the advantages. One says you get to go to 2 kinds of parties, 2 kinds of dancing, 2 kinds of chip dip, and 2 kinds of hope and y'all, and he does this fist gesture, make out, implying something more than making out. Vernagine says in a 2-party system, you always got somebody looking over your shoulder. Helps keep you honest. Kotter asks what would happen without that competition. She says you'd get a dictator, like Freddie. Now, we don't know on what terms Vernagine and Freddie were at the beginning of this 2-parter. They, of course, almost eloped when we first met her, and they have been basically boyfriend and girlfriend since then, but it seems to have faded out, and that may explain a little bit of her mild flirtation with the Not Gutenberg boy, because even though they both voted for Freddie, they're disappointed in him. He has let power corrupt him absolutely. I don't really blame her. Arnold and Juan stand and salute. Arnold saying, yes, sir, no, sir. And Juan saying, in your ear with a can of beer, sir. In your ear with a can of beer didn't come up as much as up your nose with a rubber hose, but it was one of the secondary insults, I guess you could say. There's brief cheers and applause. Freddie blows his whistle in annoyance. Kotter again repeatedly gestures for Freddie to come over. When Freddie does, Kotter wordlessly breaks the whistle chain and then stomps on the whistle. The class applauds. Freddie takes out another whistle and puts it in his mouth. There's laughter, cheers, and applause. Arnold says he feels that Freddie is becoming a real schmendrick, which was another of the scenes that we got a little preview of in part 1. And schmendrick is Yiddish for a stupid person or a hapless little jerk. Now, as far as I know, Arnold is not Jewish. He is Slavic, but he lives in Brooklyn. His best friend is Jewish. It didn't feel tremendously out of character for him to say schmendrick as it might have if Freddie or Vinnie said it. One agrees and says that Freddie is a pain in one's posterior. Vernagine, who's sitting behind them, nods fervently. Freddie is getting the feeling that none of them like him no more. He just wanted to do a good job, that's all. It ain't so much they want to be leader as he never was and never will be no follower. Vinnie would understand that. Vinnie enters and smiles. He asks if somebody mentioned his name. He gives Kotter a note and says that Vinnie is back in town. Kotter smiles and says it's official. The class cheers. We don't find out what the note is. It could be an excuse for his absences, like maybe he made up with his parents and then his mother wrote him a note. And by the way, we haven't really had as many notes from Epstein's mother as I expected. That may have been more of a thing in season 2, but it would have been interesting to see what Mrs. Barbarino had come up with, or Mr. Barbarino. Vinnie was thinking about what Kotter said, and he couldn't sell that tidy-didy crud. And crud is a euphemism on a euphemism. Crap would feel a little bit more appropriate. He couldn't even sell it to Kotter, and Kotter is the softest touch in town, so everybody knows what a pushover Mr. Kotter is. But he smiles, he's not offended. He's just so happy that Vinnie is back. Kotter pats Vinnie's arm and says he's proud of him. Arnold says Vinnie is looking well. Juan tells him welcome back. So again, working in the phrase welcome back in the show. Freddie puts his hands on Vinnie's shoulders, smiles, and says he's glad he's back. Vinnie says Goomba and gives him a close hug, and that's an Italian term for a male friend, especially a longtime family friend. Freddie sounds as if he was choked or as if Vinnie hugged him too tightly, even though they've let go by now, and he says he's not that glad, but they clasp their hands. I think Freddie is less demonstrative than Vinnie, and that's probably playing on the Italian stereotype of being very emotional and affectionate. Vinnie wonders why they need a leader at all, so this is a complete change from the beginning of part 1. Why can't everybody take care of themselves? Juan grins and nods, but Arnold wonders if they can do that. And we've had Arnold questioning before, like when Rosalie said she wasn't pregnant, can she do that? He still worries about what people can and can't do. But Juan thinks it's a great idea, and he casts his vote for no leader. Freddie seconds it, and Arnold thirds. Vinnie says it's unanimous. We didn't get the extras voting, but that's okay. They look like they agree. But he tells Horshack to get his book. Arnold is confused, but he complies. So Vinnie is still going to boss Horshack around just because that's the nature of their friendship. Kotter wants to sneak a little school in here today, but Vinnie says he hopes Kotter doesn't mind that now that Kotter and his wife are separated, Vinnie asked her out on a date, so I was right that Vinnie is likely to hit on Julie. And Kotter's understandably surprised, and Vinnie says this was just a couple minutes ago in the hall, but she said she had to think about it. Gabe goes to Julie, who's sitting on the front bench of the hallway. She's not wearing her glasses. They both say hi and then try to talk at the same time. He tells her to go first. She says she's so confused. She knows they have problems, but she really wants to work them out. That's pretty much what he was saying in the last apartment scene. She says she was so incredibly lonely without him. Now, I don't think she was gone that long. It certainly wasn't a week, maybe a day or two, but as we saw in the Longest Weekend episode, they really are used to seeing each other every day, and they are strongly connected. Perhaps not entirely in a healthy way, but it's also kind of sweet. He knows what she means. He kept turning to look for her, and she wasn't there. Last night, he told the pizza man he loved him. She guesses they both have to change. He says change is good. Without change, there'd be a lot of wet babies. She laughs, but then he promises no more jokes with her in his class. But she says his students love his jokes. It's the way he communicates with them. And that's the thing we've had throughout season 1. The Sweathogs really didn't connect with any teacher until Kotter came along with his jokes and impressions, and that makes him a better teacher. Julie loves his jokes too, but she wants to tell a joke once in a while. She can be very funny, you know. He looks startled, but he encourages her to tell a joke. She stands and says she hadn't really prepared anything, so she wants to be the one to tell the joke, but unlike him, she doesn't have this whole repertoire of jokes, and of course, this is a bit meta because Kaplan was a professional stand-up comic and not an actor, whereas she had more of a dramatic background and had played a straight woman on MASH a few years earlier. But then she comes up with, why did the chicken cross the road? He takes a pencil out of his jacket and goes into a George Burns impression. This is ironic because he said he wasn't going to do any more impressions, and now he's doing an impersonation of one of the most famous straight men of the 20th century. And Julie says the chicken crosses the road to keep his pants up. Gabe is confused by this, so then she asks, why does a fireman wear red suspenders? And they both say to get to the other side, switching the punchlines on two very corny jokes that every kid would know. Still as George Burns, he goes into his number, a song that goes, down by the river where the red roses grow. And the routine ends with, say goodnight, Gracie. And she says, say goodnight, Gracie, because that was one of those things like Played Against Sam where Gracie Allen never actually said, say goodnight, Gracie, but it fit her dippy sense of humor. She had retired in 1958 and died in 1964, but she had been a comedy, eventually marital team with George Burns since the 20s, and she had just a really funny delivery. They started out with her doing straight lines, and her voice and her intonation made even the straight lines funnier than anything that George Burns said, so he figured out he's just gonna let Gracie talk, and he'll just interject little comments like, oh, tell me more about your brother. She pretty much always played the same character from the 20s on into the 50s. This was a woman who was what they called a dumb Dora in vaudeville, but she had her own illogical logic. The early Chrissy Snow on Three's Company is an example of this, and Phoebe on Friends is kind of in that tradition. So they're not just dumb blondes, because Gracie was mostly blonde, although not naturally, but they've just got their own take on the world and a sweetness. Now, George kept working. He was actually having a comeback in the 70s with the movie Sunshine Boys, which came out in November 75, and then he would play the title character in Oh God in 77, and he did some other roles as well as some appearances as himself, including on variety shows. It's a very obvious and not obscure impression, at least in the context of 1976. The Kotters hug to the approval of the students who are clustered by the classroom door, and Arnold, of course, is the most enthusiastic because he is the biggest romantic. In the tag, the Kotters are in bed, and he's reading, but then he wants to tell her about his Aunt Bertha. She insists on telling about her Aunt Bertha. He says she's been telling jokes all day. Sometimes we had the opening and closing jokes that could have been from any episode, and now we're starting to get more of them integrated into the context of the show. We are to assume that after they made up, she's just been coming up with corny joke after corny joke, and he's been listening to them. But of course, he wants to tell his jokes too. She says he's going to laugh. He'll see himself laughing. Of course, Aunt Bertha was so fat that when she sat around the house, she sat around the house. Under the closing applause, we can hear her insist that this joke is hysterical. Not so crazy about the fat shaming, but it's kind of adorable that Julie wants to tell these awful jokes. And unlike Gabe, she's not going to do much setup for them. He tells them as little stories. She just has the lead in and the punchline, even if she's going to switch her other punchline. I give each of these episodes a letter grade, like in a classroom, so F- or A+. I gave the previous one a B+, and I felt like this was not on that level. It's still very good. There are a lot of things I like about it, but I'm going with a B. And I was trying to put my finger on exactly why it didn't work as well. I mean, it's a little less funny, and things like Vinnie's tidy-didy costume versus him being a priest. But I think ultimately the problem I have, and it's not a big problem because a B is a very respectable grade, is that I feel like where it falls down is this doesn't plausibly seem like how Freddie would act as a leader. Even if he became a quote-unquote dictator, he still would boss them around in a different way. I mean, the only way I can kind of justify it to myself is that he is channeling his basketball coach, except that we met his basketball coach who was pretty mellow and casual. The thing of he secretly wants the class to square dance, it just doesn't feel like Freddie, who has a very hip attitude towards music. So I just didn't quite buy it. But it is interesting to have that switched up. As with the episode where Mr. Woodman came over to the Kotters for dinner and decided to be a nicer guy and tell jokes, and then kind of went back to where he was, there were still traces of it. There were some consequences of it. It'll be interesting to see how this episode looks in the larger picture as far as Julie's restlessness, which we got a hint of in The Longest Weekend, and whether she will get more jokes. And before, we had Julie with a very dry sense of humor reacting to situations, but as far as just plain jokes. I do remember some specific put downs and comments that she makes later, particularly after Gabe Kaplan left the series and Marcia Strassman had to step in a lot, especially for the school scenes. So it'll be interesting to see that and whether her restlessness goes anywhere. I don't remember Julie having a job outside the home in the second or third season, but I could be wrong. And then whether there will be consequences to the Sweathogs being relatively leaderless and what this does for Vinnie and Freddie's characters. But as and not exactly standalone because it's a two-parter, it's certainly an interesting journey and following the leader and figuring out who do you follow, Julie trying to figure out if following Gabe, leading his own life is enough, and if not, what does she need to do? I also pick a head of the class for each episode, and that is a character, not necessarily a student, whose performance or arc I most enjoyed or was most interested in. I have issues with everybody's behavior in this episode, except for, as I said, I'm going to give Verna Jean a pass on her behavior with Not Goonberg Boy, who tried his darndest to steal the previous episode. Overall, although I definitely question a lot of Kotter's decisions in this two-parter, I feel like, well, part one, the most interesting characters were Julie and Vinnie, who were going through different crises. I need to go with Gabe this time because he is trying to juggle all these demands on him and figure out what to do and making some mistakes along the way, but in the end, giving some sensible advice and trying to be more sensible himself. He realizes he needs to change in some ways, but he still should be a friend to his students and communicate with his wife and still tell jokes to everybody, but give them a chance in the spotlight too. So yeah, I'll go with Gabe for this one. And even when he says, oh, you got to be firm with women, we know, as Vinnie says, that Kotter's the softest touch in town. He's going to try to break a table, but he really can't. And it's not that he's a wimp. I mean, he's got his own strength, but he's not a macho guy. He's trying to have a modern marriage, but there are bumps along the way, particularly because Julie feels she got her degree in anthropology and she can certainly study the Sweathogs, but it doesn't make any money. Again, that's his life. She's just following it. As for keeping the school life and the home life separated, that obviously is not going to happen. There will continue to be this blend and stepping over boundaries by various characters. But that is sort of the concept of the show. We will definitely see the Sweathogs coming over for more meals, and also Julie coming to the school more. Next time, I'll be looking at the episode Dr. Epstein, I presume. And we'll find out what kind of doctor he is, if any. In the meantime, lead your life as best you can.
Tease him a lot, 'cause we got him on the spot. Welcome back.